Hello, listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of The Cult Vault. I'm your speaker, Casey, and before we get started with this episode, I just wanted to say a big hello and thank you to my newest patron, Claire. I'm really over the moon to have you here. It's wonderful to see more people coming together to support the Patreon, which means that I can continue releasing this weekly content and interviewing survivors and bringing those interviews into the public forum. I hope you enjoy your name on the sponsor section of the website, and please go back and listen to previous episodes and deep dives which you now have access to. I hope that you'll enjoy being a member of the Patreon, and thank you so much for choosing my small platform to be a part of. In this week's episode, we are going to be listening to Lindsay from Playing in Traffic, the sister of last week's guest, Tony, a former deaconess in the World Mission Society Church of God. And this episode is going to bring a sister's perspective of losing a family member to a high-demand religious group. But not just a family member, a best friend, a confidant, and somebody that Lindsay was very close to. Lindsay talks us through Tony's integration into the faith and the difficulty when her sister was a part of it, and the subsequent reunion that they have had now that Tony has left. And the podcast that they run together, Playing in Traffic, which is available on podcast platforms, so go and check it out. But for now, here is Lindsay. So hi, Lindsay, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for agreeing to come and chat with me today and to add another perspective on something we have spoken about just last week, and this time from a family member's perspective. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for having me here. We're very excited. I'm Lindsay. I am your past guest sister, Tony. She was part of World Mission Society Church of God. And I started following the church when she joined it in 2006. And so I've been kind of just following, keeping my eye on them. And I live in a suburb outside of Denver, Colorado, and I'm very excited to be here.
And you mentioned there that Tony joined this group in 2006. So what age were you? And do you remember her coming to you and telling you that she'd found a new church group to become a part of?
Yeah. So I was my last few months of high school. So I was 17. And she had a friend come back into town. So she's 4 years older than me. So she was in her early 20s. A friend of hers came into town and was like, come join this Bible study. And we both went. And she thought it sounded interesting. I thought it sounded kind of cuckoo. And then she got baptized in April of 2006. And then it just started from there. So 17, I was 17. I think she was 21. 20, yeah.
And despite the distance that grew between the two of you, which I'm sure people will have heard from the previous episode, but if not, we will discuss at length today, your relationship with your sister is very strong at this point.
Yes. Both of our families have a joke whenever our phones ring. Like, you don't even need to look at who's calling, you know it's your sister. We talk all the time. And now we do a podcast together. So that's even more. Now we get to say that we're doing work meeting items. I have to take the phone call. We're doing work together. So, but yeah, we're very close. She's my best friend.
And what is the name of the podcast that you host with your sister, Tony? And what is the premise for the show?
So we have a podcast called Playing in Traffic. And it was originally created. Tony was sort of struggling when she came out of the church. And so we thought we could come together and make a podcast about her experience of leaving and what it's been like for her, because she was at a point where she really wanted to kind of share that with family members and friends without having to retell it over and over again. And that awkwardness of like having that face-to-face individual conversation. And so I was like, let's record it and make it a podcast. And then for people who are interested, we thought like 10 of our family members would come find it and listen to it and be like, oh, interesting. That makes sense. But it's turned into this like lovely creative project. And we're just meeting so many lovely people. And yeah, we just make it up as we go. I don't
It's
know what it'll go.
great. It's great. It's available on all podcast platforms, Playing in Traffic. And it's great because there's been other survivors from the same movement that have actually appeared on the show alongside you and Tony.
Right. Yeah. So when we started, I mean, you can hear it in the first few episodes, Tony's very like hesitant and it was more for her to just kind of get it out. And then as we're getting emails from people and she's meeting and talking with other people and realizing like, this wasn't my like individual experience, like this is a shared experience and it was done by design. And I think seeing the systemic like ways of it has really been helping her cope with it. And the people that come out of this organization have all just been, I mean, you can tell that they have similar spirits, like they're just lovely, sweet. They genuinely wanted to be a part of something good for humanity. And you can really see that in their personalities. I mean, it's just so cool. They're all lovely people.
It's great as well that you have watched your sister go through this experience and now you get to hear the impact that the same experiences have had on other people. And it's probably strange for you to sit there and say, oh my goodness, I remember when the same thing happened with Tony, and other people are coming forward and sharing their same experiences, which is great. And something that I love about Playing in Traffic, which I mentioned in the episode with Tony, is the disclaimer song, which she told me you recorded with your ukulele.
Yeah.
So I think we actually played it in the last episode. Tony was kind enough to agree to let me play it in the last episode. So I'll play it again here if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Lindsay. This is the disclaimer song of the podcast Playing in Traffic, which is just my favorite thing.
Welcome to Playing in Traffic. This is our disclaimer song. This is our disclaimer song. It's our opinion. Don't sue us. Don't sue us. If you didn't want us to make a podcast about you, then you probably shouldn't have started a religion where you brainwash people and separated them from your family, so it's kind of your fault. But don't sue us. Don't sue us. You know who you are, so don't do it. Don't sue us. Don't sue us.
And then hopefully people really enjoy listening to that just the same way that I did, because it was completely unexpected for me when I was listening to the first episode. I was like, hey, I need one of them. That's a great idea. So you mentioned that you're in Denver, Colorado.
Yeah.
Or a suburb of. Is that the Broncos?
Yeah. Yep. Tony loves football and I'm not really a sports fan, so that's one of our differences.
Is that close to where Tony is? Are you near her physically, or do you just communicate a lot over the phone?
Yeah, we're not far. We're about 45 minutes from each other. So at first when we were recording, I would drive all the way to her house. And then after a few times I was like, let's just try this over the internet, because I don't want to drive 45 minutes every time we record. When we realized that we were going to keep going and like do it weekly, we were like, nah, let's figure out a different way to do it. That's a lot of driving.
People can't see this right now, but you have like the funkiest armchair that you're sitting in. It looks like a
I love this. Throne. I got this at the thrift store for $15. I know, I love it. Wow. It's my prize.
Let's go all the way back to World Mission Society. Let's go back to what your childhood and relationship was like with Tony before she found this group. Tony gave us a little bit of insight into what growing up was like for her, and how close you two were as siblings. But I'd like to hear that from your perspective, if you'd like to tell us.
Of course. So again, 4-year difference. So Tony was always like my cool older sister. All of the pop culture, like music, clothes, anything Tony was doing, I was doing, because that was the cool thing. That's what the older girls were doing. We were always close. Tony was like, I always viewed her as like my protector. Like, so if anything was happening to me, I wouldn't go to my parents and tell them. It was like I would whisper it to Tony so she could go, take care of it. I had a babysitter who was really mean to me, and Tony like told my mom, and like immediately, we were taken away, and it was just like I always like. And from then on, it was like, okay, Tony's my protector, and that's who I go to when I have anything bad happening. And then growing up, our dynamic was her best friend was sisters with my best friend. And so the four of us, with that 4-year difference, there was like a lot of like social connections and just very, very close. And then, as we got older, we got really into politics. We were very like anti-war. We loved going to like all the new indie movies that were like about the stuff going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so my sister was kind of my political rallier also. We were kind of the black sheep in the family. We grew up in a really conservative family, like Republican conservative. And so Tony and I would go to family functions and just like argue with all the uncles. And, it was just me and her always arguing this like crazy liberal side of things. And so, yeah, I would say pretty close. And then also something that I feel like we've kind of missed out on saying on our podcast often is we actually have a stepbrother and a stepsister. And so when Tony was really involved with the church, for me, that was really helpful because I still had like a sibling relationship with them. And I really clung to the two of them as like, okay, you guys are my full on siblings, so that was really like, as much as I lost Tony for those years, I also did have 2 other siblings to kind of latch onto and have that experience with too. So
when Tony had joined this new group and eventually she started a family once she was involved with the movement, got married, and was that the only grandchild in the family at that point? That's not something I discussed with Tony.
Oh yeah, so that was kind of all happening. So I got pregnant when I was 18. So Tony joined in April. I graduated and then got pregnant like that summer. So really early, my family was really mad. It was a shock to everyone. Like it wasn't planned, but Tony was like just getting involved, but still like she wasn't extreme or anything. So and then she ended up 2 months later getting pregnant with her son. So it was fun because we were both pregnant at the same time. And she was pregnant. So for the year that I was pregnant, I actually like moved out of town. I moved like south a few hours, and it was like, I got to go kind of figure this out. And then when I had my daughter, I came back to Thornton where Tony lives. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but and we actually lived together with our 2 new babies.
Wow.
And that was, so it was, my daughter was first, but 2 months later it was my nephew.
So
they were both little tiny babies together. Yeah.
And are they close now, being so close in age, and you and Tony being so close?
Yeah, we've always joked that they behave way more like siblings and cousins because, for a while they would just fight and then they'd get along perfect and then they fight. So
that's so great. So you grew up with a good relationship with your sister and the rest of your family too. You had step siblings, but they were a core part of your family.
Yeah.
And you always felt that even when Tony's absence within the family grew, you still had that sibling connection with other people in the family.
Right.
Which is really great, because if it's something you've grown up with and something you've always been used to, I imagine it would have been a lot harder to maintain the boundaries of communication that you managed to do with Tony had you not had other siblings to support you through that time, or to offer that sibling relationship. So that's really great to hear, and that she was your protector and that you felt safe around her. And Tony also mentioned that you grew up with pretty liberal Christian values. So your grandparents had a strong Christian faith, and that was passed down to you, but not in a strict sense. So there'd be occasional visits to church on Sundays and celebrating holidays and and understanding Christian values, but not so much to the point where there was a sort of a high demand placed on you as a family to attend lots of church related activities, to adhere to a strict set of Christian rules.
Right. And I had sort of a period in high school of self-imposed like really strict Christianity for myself, because I joined with a friend. I went to this youth group, and like I quit cheerleading because I wanted to spend more time in the church. Like I got pretty involved in it. I sang in the choir, and I went 3 times a week. I loved it. And then as I got older and I started really having like philosophical conversations with people outside of my bubble, I was like, oh, I don't know that I really believe in the basis of, this so much. And so I was kind of doing that as Tony was being introduced to the church. Like as I ended my high school career, I was like, I don't really know what I believe in. And Tony was like, come to this Bible study. Let's join this church. And I was like, nah, I don't think so.
So you've had an experience that is similar to how Tony started off in some ways, with the expectations of commitment to various Bible study sessions or church-related activities, which is quite interesting. Because had the group been this particular group that you joined at the time without realizing, it could have been you that went down the same path, but just at a different time.
I always say I'm amazed that not even just Tony's, but that at that time that I didn't get involved in another either religion or cult or something, because, at that time I was sort of exploring everything. And so I would have Sunday dinner at the Krishna temple with my friends because they served like a free dinner, and I'd be like, that's cool, like maybe I'm a Hindu, I don't know. And I would go to like these rainbow gatherings where there was just like all sorts of people, right, and probably plenty of cults that I could have joined at any point. So I'm more shocked that I didn't join something like that than that I didn't. And that I just became an atheist at that point and have kind of stayed that way since.
I feel like that's a really interesting position to be in for somebody that has a sibling that went on to join a high demand group, because a lot of people have a very skewed perception of why or how somebody might join a group, but you have a very open mind and a very understanding viewpoint on actually how easily it can happen to anybody. And it could have even been you at one point, which is not an opinion I think a lot of people may hold for themselves.
Yeah.
So you are 17 and Tony said that she was 22 when she joined.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's right. Her birthday's in April. So yeah.
Do you remember when she came to you and told you that she'd found a new group?
Not really so much like this grand announcement, but right after high school, we went on a trip to Europe, and Tony would point out things about like the older churches. Like we would go on tours of the cool churches out there in London. And my sister would say like, doesn't this feel kind of dark and creepy? Like things that she was starting to learn in the church. And I'd be like, yeah, it is kind of dark. Like I was kind of agreeing with her. And so I wasn't so much like, what's this weird religion that you're getting into? I was like, they sound kind of cool. I don't want to go with you because I don't want to be involved in it, but I don't have a problem with it because they were teaching things like, and I'm sure we can talk about this later too, how traditional holidays are like pagan holidays. So like Easter, Christmas. And at that point I was like, that is true. I mean, they're not telling you a lie. That is like historically factual. So yeah, cool, Tony. Like this, at first I was like, you found a cool church, they're telling you some off the grid kind of things that are not like mainstream. And I obviously at that point, like nobody knew the extent of what the group was like in its full, but
I think when people visit London and some parts of the UK, a lot of the architecture that is present around religious buildings, it is very Gothic. There was a very big period of Gothic architecture in England and the UK. So there are a lot of buildings that you can look at and you can see sort of a lot of the pointy window frames and the spiky spiral steeples and things. So you might look at them and think, wow, that is dark. I think like Westminster is very Gothic. There's a few buildings in Liverpool where I live that you can look at, and the architecture you can look at it and see that it's quite Gothic. There's a beautiful cathedral, and it's actually the Anglican Cathedral in Liverpool is really interesting because it's Gothic on one side and a different type of architecture on the other, so you can just see the differences from one side of the building to the other. So you might come over here and think, well, yeah, these buildings are a bit darker than
definitely. Yeah.
So I don't know if that would have been a red flag for somebody to pick up on some of the more intense teachings that Toni was a part of at that time.
Right. Yeah. Like early in, there was nothing that she was saying that I was like, oh, that kind of feels a little icky. It was probably about a year until, and like I said, as soon as we got back from Europe, I got pregnant and I moved away. And so there was like a full 9 months where Toni was like really getting involved in the church and I wasn't really around very often. I would come home every few weekends to like visit, but I was like definitely in my own mind and doing my own kind of soul searching.
And you mentioned that you did go along to a few of the Bible studies as well, that Toni would invite you to, encourage you to come along to, but nothing that the group was teaching really stuck with you personally.
No. And I continued over the years to go to the Bible studies because I really wanted to understand why Toni was taking them in the way that she was. Like, I really, really wanted to understand it. And I would just hear the Bible studies and I was like, they just sound so, their Bible studies are very like, if you read this passage in this chapter, now flip all the way to the back of the Bible and like connect it with this verse over here. And so you can see how this chapter over here that is totally unrelated to this, how they're connected. And I just was like, that makes the Bible, and that was what I would argue with him, is you have to have a basic belief in the Bible as the word of God. And so how do you preach this to somebody who doesn't already have that? And they're like, well, if you don't believe that the Bible is the word of God, then you're not going to believe this. And I was like, all right, well, I'm probably not going to believe. So that was sort of my stopping point, was like, I don't believe that like God wrote the Bible. So how do you get people that don't already believe that to like join? And I couldn't connect it. I never really believed it. I don't know.
But you tried, you could see how much it meant to your sister as she became more and more involved in the group. And you tried a number of times to become a part of it, but it wasn't something that ever kind of struck you as a group that had progressive ideas and interesting, not in the way that it struck Toni, because a few of the teachings that they had, even on the first meeting, she spoke about how they kind of were so profound and things that she'd never heard of before, and information that she'd never been privy to before, and she finally had access to this information, and it was kind of like world changing for her. But you tried.
I'm thinking this through as we're talking, and I guess what had happened was I really was doing Bible studies of my own at like 15, 16. I'd sit on the phone with a friend and like do a Bible study. So I really was like studying the Bible, and I took it all in and very literal and very belief in it. And then I had already kind of come through that process of saying, like, I don't really think that I believe that the Bible is the word of God, and I don't believe in heaven and hell. And so I had sort of already done that, like, processing of that concept by the time Tony was beginning in the church. And so I don't think my brain was able to go backwards and then go like, well, maybe I believe in the Bible, but this version of it. Like I had already kind of gone through it with my own self and my own version of what my spirituality or religion or lack of it was going to look like for me. So it's probably that reason why I could never like sit in on a Bible study and be like, oh, there it is. That's what you needed to say to explain it to me.
And after you move away for 9 months, you said you had a few things to work out with your pregnancy, and then you and Tony ended up living together at one point. So you must have made a decision at some point in your pregnancy to move back home and to have your child near where the rest of your family lived.
Yeah. I moved back home like a week before I went into labor because it was always the plan. Like I'll move back home so my mom can help me. And, you know, I'm 18. I have no idea what I'm doing with a baby. So I moved back in with my mom for a few weeks. And then my sister and I were like, let's get an apartment together. This is the perfect situation. We both have little babies, and her soon to be husband, they were engaged at that point. I lived with them. So it was our 2 babies and then me, my sister and her husband. And we lived in an apartment, and that was really when living intimately in that apartment with them that I was like, oh, you guys are really involved in this. Like, this isn't just a normal, you're going to church a lot. Like you're doing church at home, and it's like your whole life is revolved around it.
So is this the part you kind of said that you didn't really notice until about a year into Tony's tenure that things were a bit more intense than maybe you first realized? So would you say that it was at this time?
Yeah.
And what sorts of things would you notice or pick up on, or what conversations would you have with Tony where you would address the intensity or severity of the situation?
Yeah. I would say it was like pretty much a constant conversation that we were having. I'm a little sister, so I'm always picking on Tony. And so, you know, I was constantly picking out things like, what the heck are you guys doing here? One of the first things that I like remember of that apartment is, I don't know if Tony went into this in hers, but the women, when they pray, they wear a veil over their head. And they also have prayer times throughout the day, and it's like 5 a.m., 8 a.m. every single day. So even if they're not at church, I'd walk out into the living room. Tony would be sitting there praying for like 15 full minutes with a veil over her head. And I would just be like pouring my coffee, like trying to like quietly work around her while she's like sitting on the couch praying. And I was like, okay, like that's kind of a new one. I've never really seen anybody sitting at 5 a.m. on the couch wearing their veil. Let's see. They used to have pictures of mother and father like framed and hanging along the wall. And when Tony would walk by the picture, she'd go, isn't she just so beautiful? Like she was like enamored with this random Korean lady hanging on our wall in our apartment. Wow. Another thing is they had to go to church Sabbath day. So every Saturday, all day they were gone. And then they were constantly out preaching. Like they were just really never home. And they had a brand new tiny little baby. So they were like always out with their baby. And there was a specific Tuesday night service that they had to go to, specifically because they lived with a non-believer. And Tony would explain it like, well, if we miss this, we need to go wash the sins of living in the house with a non-believer off of us. And, you know, of course I would always like joke about that and be like, have a fun shower, like enjoy, you know, like I would poke fun at it because I was like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But so just a lot of like very literal interpretations of the Bible, like played out in their day-to-day life. And it just felt very extreme. And I thought it was weird, but it was like, I mean, for 18, 19-year-old, funny weird. Like I was like, my sister's crazy, but not like alarming. You know, I still kind of thought that it was cool and rebellious that she was doing this. I'm like, it's not my cup of tea, but it's cool that you're doing something different than the mainstream, like regular Christianity. You know, if you got to choose one, it might as well be the weird, fun one.
We mentioned a little bit in our conversation yesterday, which will have aired last week by the time this episode comes out, that there are similarities between other South Korean religious movements that we've spoken about on the show. And the fact that there was a photo of mother and father in the house that Toni would kind of revere as she walked past is so similar to the conversations that I've had with like Teddy Hose, who is a second generation Unification Church ex-member. Oh. And him and his family would bow to pictures of true parents, mother and father, Sun Myung Moon. And Toni didn't mention living with you and having those pictures on the wall. And she did mention going to services on Tuesday evenings. And she mentioned kind of preaching every day of the week, services on Tuesday, cleaning and cooking on Friday, and then the all-day Sabbath Saturday obligations. But she didn't mention what Tuesdays were specifically for. And that makes so much sense now. And I am shocked that it was a mandatory service for people who lived with secular people.
Yeah, and I actually don't think that they still preach that. I don't think that they still say that, because as she came out and we were kind of discussing like funny things that I remembered from then, I was like, you definitely told me that, because that was like one of the funniest things about Tuesday nights was that you guys had to leave to go. And I believe this is one of them, because there's actually a lot of teachings that they don't teach now in the church, and they'll say, we never taught that. And past members will be like, you absolutely taught that. I have my notes from you teaching me how to go out and preach about that. So that happens a lot, that there's things that earlier members did like vehemently, they really believed. And then all of a sudden overnight, it was like, nope, we don't teach that anymore. I don't know where you heard that. We're not doing that anymore. So I think this was one of those things, or I could be wrong and they still do the Tuesday night service, but I believe it's one of the ones that Toni was like, I don't remember doing that, or I don't remember that being a thing, but it definitely was.
And when Toni was given the position of deaconess within the movement, did you notice again a significant change in her behavior, in her husband's behavior, in their commitments to the church? Because they were already dedicating a large amount of time to church-related activities. And then once she was given that title, from Toni's story that she told us, it escalated again at that point.
Yeah. I don't remember what year she was made a deaconess. I don't know that I knew that while it was happening. Yes, definitely. Like pretty much after we lived in that apartment together, we kind of split ways. Like, obviously we stayed in contact, but we were both raising our own kids, and like, I'm in my early 20s, just like living my life, not really paying too close attention to everything Toni's doing. But I think it was about when they started moving into the house churches that I was like, this is like a different level of extreme. My mom and I sort of would show up at the church and hang out, and almost daringly be like, I dare them to ask us to leave because we're here to hang out with my nephew. I would bring my daughter to come hang out with my nephew, and it would be Sabbath day, and I would just be like, I want to visit with my sister, or even if it wasn't Sabbath day, but like, oh, they're at the church today, let's go visit. The church members, I don't think they really liked us, because I was still kind of popping in and out. They would say like, oh, do you want to do a Bible study? And I would be like, sure. I was kind of open to doing them because I was like, sure, I want to know what you guys are talking about and preaching. They showed me like this very weird doomsday apocalyptic video of like bombs going off. It was really scary. And that was something too that I could see with Tony as time was going on, is like she was very stressed about the world ending. Like they were teaching the literal doomsday in 2012, the world was going to end. And like I jokingly wrote a little short story about it, about how my sister mails me a dehydrator to my office. And everyone's like, what's that for? And I'm like, don't you know it's like the end of the world? Because Tony and her, you can take that out. I don't know.
No, I think that's really, really interesting.
Tony and her husband I would call them and say, what are you doing? And they would be dehydrating meat to stockpile for the end of the world. They would have these like boxes and boxes of like stored like dehydrated water and food packets, and they would dehydrate all the fruit and the meat and make little like care packages. Like they were ready for the end of the world. And it was coming from North Korea.
That is so interesting, because Tony definitely mentioned the 2012 prophecy, which was something that we all had heard of. And I remember, everybody was saying it's the end of the world in 2012 because of the Mayan calendar, though, I believe. So she talked about how severe it was and how people were, preparing, but she didn't talk about her personal experiences around preparing for it, which is interesting because a lot of religious practices are so that you are your spirit is pure for when the end times come, so that you can go to live in God's kingdom.
Right.
So
like, why would you need dehydrated meat? I don't know. I don't know if maybe they were expecting something to happen before that aspect of it. Like nuclear bomb goes off and then there'll be time in between where they need to survive to the end.
Right.
I think was more thinking, but it was a definite, like, we're going to take your soul up to heaven. That sort of left behind concept of take your body up.
And did you and Tony move out of accommodation with each other when her family moved into the church?
No, I mean, I went to visit her at the farther away one, and that one, I think we've only visited once or twice because it was like 4 hours from where we lived. And it was definitely weird. And I got into an argument with one of the members because I was there to visit my sister and my nephew and my brother-in-law. And this guy just like wanted to get me to do a Bible study. And I was like, no, I'm not here for that today. Like, I'm not interested in him. And I kind of got like a little mean to him, which then after I felt bad because I was like, I didn't mean to yell at the guy, but he like would not leave me alone. He was like following me around this house. And Tony was more like, don't embarrass me in front of these people, rather than like, hey, can you leave my sister alone? She was more on like, what time are you guys leaving? Because I've got a lot of stuff to do. She was kind of like, you could tell she didn't really want us to be there for the whole day. So that was like just a little disheartening, I would say. And then one of the things of writing my notes for today is I forgot that my brother-in-law used to work with my ex-boyfriend for a while. So there was like years where a lot of the communication and the information coming about my sister was kind of through that relationship.
Right.
So it wasn't that I didn't talk to Tony, but it definitely wasn't daily, maybe weekly or monthly at that point, where I knew she was okay, but I was hearing more of like the daily stuff through that relationship where my brother-in-law was seeing my ex-boyfriend at the time, all the time.
So even though Tony's moved into the church at this point, her entire life is consumed by the faith, her commitments and responsibilities at that time in the church. There's no capacity for her to even get a good night's sleep. So she can't entertain her biological family when they come to visit for any length of time. And Tony does discuss that difficulty at length in our chat around kind of trying to balance that surprise visit from you and your mum, and also all of the things she's got going on in the back of her head about, you know, she's got this huge to-do list that she has to get through. And it's interesting to hear it from your perspective on how you knew she was okay because your ex-partner could tell you that, and you could drop in on her if you wanted to check on her because she was only a few hours away. So you managed to keep some level of communication with Toni despite her kind of distancing herself from biological family. Is that something that you did intentionally, do you think?
Oh, yeah. Well, see, in my head, I always knew that this was going to be temporary. I always knew that like she was going to get burnout and she was going to need somewhere to, like, I just was like, she can't do this for forever. One of these days, something will click for her and she'll see how like weird this is and extreme. So I think I just was like, this is annoying for now. This is like an annoying interaction between us now, but it's not going to be like that forever. So I don't know. I guess I felt more like just like I missed her and I was like sad that she couldn't see like the reality of it. And I think those are the moments that are really comforting for Toni when she's meeting these other members who have similar experiences. That feeling of being torn between your physical, actual family and then like your spiritual family, and like having to hold that inside and not being able to say that to anybody in the church. And you can't really say that to your family members either, because she would never want us to know that there's even a slight bit of doubt or like negative light on the church. And so I think she thought that was an individual experience, a lot of those kinds of things. And so meeting the people now on the other side, she's like, I think it helps her to see that that was sort of created by design to like isolate them away from their families. And that's really helpful for all of us to see, right? I mean, absolutely, when you see that it was designed like that, you're like, well, what do you do? Yeah, I don't know.
When you were recognizing this distance growing between Toni and your family, were there conversations with you and your family, your mom, your grandparents, when Toni wasn't there, where you would talk about sort of the differences in her personality or her character, or how you don't get to see her anymore, or the strain that her new belief system was putting on your family around like Christmases and holiday times?
Yes. I think I kind of felt a little resentful because I felt like I was kind of the middleman for a while. So there was like a little bit of like, I wish my sister would just come to this stupid family event, because everybody is just saying how sad they are that she's not here and not enjoying the actual thing that we're doing, like a wedding or whatever. That was always everybody's comment, like, oh, your sister didn't come, you know? And after a while, you know, being in your mid-20s, you're just like, yeah, whatever, get over it. We're here. Like, aren't you happy that I'm here? Come on, like, show me some attention. I definitely remember feeling that way at events, because and for me, I would kind of argue, I would push back on my family a little bit, because for me, their reaction to Toni's church was also silly, in the sense that they were like, I can't believe that she believes in those things. And my pushback would be like, it's really not that different from what you guys believe. There's just a few like character plot twists to it, and it's a lot more extreme, but really like all of this whole thing is silly. You guys are all crazy. So I felt like I was constantly arguing with both people on both sides, like with my family, where I'm like, it's not that bad, she's fine, she's an adult, she can make her own decisions. And then with Toni, where I'm like, this is crazy, what are you doing, come out of there.
So you're acting as mediator between two different belief systems and two different parts of your family.
Yeah.
And you yourself have your wants and needs. You said there, you know, where's the focus for me? Where's you know, everybody's so worried about where Toni is and what Toni's doing, but I'm actually here and I'm ready to celebrate Christmas, and I'm ready to have this time together as a family. So why don't we just enjoy this time? Tony's not going to be here. She has her other commitments. She has her other interests. And even though your family might not have understood the depth or the severity of Tony's situation, especially with her own mind and her physical and mental health at that time, it's not commonly known methodology for the average everyday person. So how is anybody supposed to know what Tony's going through if they're not educated in cultic studies or manipulation and coercion? So Tony's going through this whole other thing that none of you know about. As far as you're aware, she's very committed to her faith, and her kind of immediate family, as in her husband and her child, have decided to continue their commitment to the church by moving into the church premises, taking on roles within the church that mean that their whole world revolves around the faith. But that's kind of like what your family see. That's Tony's decision. But she's going through this whole other ordeal. So it must be strange for you to think back on those moments where you're trying to mediate between the two things without realizing actually what Tony was going through.
Right. Oh, yeah. Because in those moments, I'm like, if Tony would just come to this stupid thing, then everyone would shut up about it. But I felt bad for my family because it was like they were constantly like reliving the sadness of her not coming to the same holidays after every year. And I'm like, you guys, she is never going to come to Easter. Just like move on. It's okay. We'll see her, because Tony was very good about this. She would come either after, like on Christmas, not for a few years, she was really extreme, but she would come like, can I come the day after and see everybody? Can I come at 6 o'clock when you guys are done opening presents or doing anything Easter related? Like she really did try. And so even when she would do that, it almost sometimes felt like, what do you want from her? She doesn't celebrate Easter. She's coming at 6. Everybody, let's do it. Let's have a great time, like it's fine. And we didn't see any of the extreme stuff, the negative stuff. Like I didn't know, I'm still finding out stuff that happened. So at the time I was just getting more annoyed with my family and my sister, like on both ends, where I was just like, you guys are all driving me crazy. And and I would like secretly be like researching. I had a desk job at the time, so like most of my day was just me like trying to find blogs and any information I could about the church, so that I just had like something to give to Tony of like, see, here's some proof that there's like something sketchy or something going on with it.
Why do you think you made the decision to go and research the group? Did you have a feeling that something wasn't right with either Tony or her belief system, or the amount of time that she was given to the church, or the polarizing between Tony and your family? There must have been a reason for you
that's
to,
really
if your grandparents are going to church and you're saying that's your belief system, she just has her own belief system, just let her have it. Yeah. I'm sure you're not researching your grandparents' church.
I wonder what it was that was like the first thing that tipped me off that it's like not just an extreme religion, but like pretty like a cult. That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. But
it might be that we don't know.
I think it was the 2012 stuff. I think the doomsday stuff really bothered me because it was weighing so heavily on her soul. And I would say, like, what are you going to do if the world doesn't end? Are you going to stay in the church? Like at that point, what do you do? Because Tony and I are sisters. And so we have this unique ability that I can say kind of mean things to her and she can say mean things back. And then we can just say, okay, I'll call you tomorrow. Love you. Bye. So I feel like that communication, that like us being sisters, made it easy to have those conversations where I'm like, Tony, if you don't leave after 2012, then that just doesn't make any sense. And she's like, there isn't going to be after 2012. I don't need to worry about that. And so after 2012, I think that's when I got frustrated with it, where I was like, okay, now they're saying that they never even taught that teaching, but they very, very clearly did. And that kind of gaslighting to the members to say, like, I don't know why you guys thought we were teaching that, but we didn't teach that. Where they're like, well, we must have misunderstood. That really kind of made me mad. That was when I was like, they're really like manipulating these members. And like, that was probably about the time too that I was like, okay, like this is kind of messed up. And like, why would they do that? What is this church doing?
Did you find anything to take to Tony during your research? I don't know if at that point, well, Tony mentioned that when she first joined, there wasn't access to the internet like we have today, or the internet was nothing like what it is today. So even if people were talking about their experiences at that time when she joined in 2006, it might not have been even easy to find those written experiences or those testimonies. And even today, I imagine it's not entirely easy to find a lot of accurate information, especially because, as Tony described, there's heavy propaganda involved with the movement. So it's likely that would be what people would stumble across before they got to ex-members' testimonies and real life experiences. So did you actually manage to find anything?
I will have to say here, this is the one thing Tony told me not to talk about.
What we'll say here is that we had a discussion around some of the things that you did find that we're not going to include in this episode, because there has been legal action taken by the church against some people that have decided to speak out against the church. So we won't include that segment of conversation that we've just had. But when you did start to find things on the internet and started to kind of make strange connections, when you took that to Tony, what was her reaction?
So at the time, she actually said that she took the questions to her pastor and that he gave her all of these responses. And then later, when we were kind of getting ready to do the podcast and kind of going over all of that, she said, I would have absolutely never, ever approached my pastor. I must have lied to you because I would have never done that. So I don't know where her answers of the questions that I asked her came from. If that was like a scripted, like this is what you tell people if they ever ask about that. I don't know where it came from.
Wow, like, maybe, or maybe she just didn't want you to second guessing her beliefs and she didn't want to have that conversation with you. So to kind of shut you down, she said, I actually did look into this with my pastor and you're wrong. And that kind of just leaves that.
Right, because that's kind of what happened. I mean, I was like, okay, there's an explanation for it.
Yeah. But from what Tony did tell me, even if she did take that information to her pastor or to leadership, who she mentioned, being quite close to, in terms of, raising her son and all of those things, that the entire church would have known, but also justifies and explains away any questions or queries or doubts that people may have about the faith with scripture. So even if she would have gone to them and said, what is this that my sister's found on the internet? First of all, that would have given the church an opportunity to paint you in a bad light for trying to stray her or lead her astray. So there could have been the opportunity for the church to cause more divide there between you and your sister. But also there probably would have been tons of scripture or things that leadership could have just drawn from immediately to justify or explain away any doubts or queries that Tony may have had from what you found on the internet.
And that's the frustrating part as a family member, is that you think if you do enough research and you come up with that, like Tony was trying to do that to us to get us into the church, and I'm doing it to get her out of the church. Like if I just if I just get that one thing that's going to like get her out of it, she's going to come with me and run out of that church. But she's doing the same thing. She's like, if I can just find that one Bible study that will just get Lindsay, then she'll come into the church. And we're both doing that for like years at each other, just like come into the church, no, come out of the church. So it was funny that we're doing the exact same thing, but just on the other sides.
And both of you think it's the right thing to do. Both of you believe more than anything that that's the right thing to do. So after 2012 came and went and the world kind of carried on as normal and nothing significant really happened other than this prophesized date coming and going, do you remember how you felt in that moment or as time passed after 2012?
Yeah, I got more like worried because I realized that she had kind of lost the logic. I mean, up until that point, there was something that they were like, once it gets to 2012, everything that we've been saying will come true. And I think after that, for me, that was kind of when I was like, this is definitely more of a cult than a religion, because if they can keep members after that and really tell them like, we never taught that, like they could get them to really kind of believe in anything. And that was kind of more when my brain went to what is a cult. I started doing a lot more research on like Jonestown and Waco and, Heaven's Gate, all of those. And when I started watching documentaries about them and reading books and really like going into that space, like I started to get nervous for her. And I was worried, that if they can make you believe that the world's going to end and then it doesn't, and that doesn't deter you and your belief in it, like they could literally tell you anything. And they were moving her around. So she moved to a different house church. She moved to a few different ones. And one of the things that she struggled with, I don't know if she touched on this. This is something I'll say that allegedly over my research that I've heard other members say is that they really discourage having children. If you don't already have children, they discourage you from getting pregnant because it's considered child abuse in their church to bring a baby into the end times. And so Tony really was struggling with wanting to have another baby like close to the age of her first son. And then eventually made the decision to have a second baby. And I was really proud of her. And like, I kind of had a little bit of hope. Like, I know that she's not supposed to do that that's something in the church that they discourage. Just based off of like YouTube videos of people coming out that are like, they told me I couldn't have a baby. I mean, I've seen, this is all allegedly, so don't sue me, people. But, I've seen videos of past members that have said even that the pastors have escorted them to abortion clinics. And I have never heard that like firsthand from anyone. So I'll say that was just on the internet somewhere. I don't know how accurate that like one story that I overheard, right? But you hear that kind of stuff and you're like, what the hell? Like what is that? That's not good. So I was actually really proud of her when she decided to have her second baby, because I knew that was, if not to the extreme of that, I knew that it was discouraged for her to do that.
I'm sure there was a lot of cognitive dissonance in that decision making around Tony's maternal instincts and idealized version of her family and what the church would think of her, what leadership would think, what her fellow congregants would think, because there's a lot of judgment that goes along in these high demand religious groups. So as you mentioned, when you'd visit and Tony would say, don't embarrass me, she's probably thinking, this is the community I live with. I worry about these people's opinions of me more than I worry about most other things. So please don't embarrass me. So that must have been a very, very difficult decision for Tony to make, and quite a brave one, I think, given her situation.
And looking back at my behavior towards Tony, obviously I was in my early 20s and I didn't grasp the situation that was happening. And I definitely like carried some guilt as she was coming out and I'm finding these things out. I'm like, I was supportive, but I was also a little bit mean, where I was just like, I'm coming to your church whether you like it or not, and I'm going to say whatever I want to these people, and they can't tell me, they can't tell me I can't be here and blah blah blah. Like I had more of that sort of standpoint at certain points, and I look back and like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry that I just kind of busted in there and demanded that you're going to hang out with me. I don't care.
Yeah, but I think that's so important, because even if the situations would have made Toni feel uncomfortable, or did make her feel uncomfortable, she knew that line of communication with you was still open. So when things started to deteriorate for her in her belief systems, in her health, with the responsibilities that were on her shoulders, with her own immediate family, she would have known that there was a place that she could retreat to, which is so, so important, because as Toni mentioned in our episode, there's so many times where people try for decades sometimes to reach their loved ones who are involved in these high demand groups and don't seem to get anywhere, and so just give up. And so when that person is ready to leave, or is thinking about leaving, they don't let that thought process go any further, because there's nowhere for them to retreat to. So even in those situations where you were perhaps a bit younger, a bit rambunctious, very kind of steadfast and strong in your opinions and the way that you wanted to present yourself to other people, and the sternness when you would say, no, I'm not here today for a Bible study. I'm here to spend time with my sister and my nephew and my brother-in-law. So stop pestering me. That would have been difficult for Toni, but it would have also allowed her to know that you couldn't be swayed in your decision not to join the church, and you also would still be there for her if she decided to leave herself, which of course you were.
Yeah, and actually when she started to not fully come out, but like starting to have a little bit of doubts, she would call me and say, I'm going to tell you something, but don't tell anybody yet, because I'm not coming out of the church all the way, but blah, 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 like these are my doubts. And you can't tell mom and dad, because I don't want them to get their hopes up that I'm like coming out fully of the church. I don't know what I want to do yet, So I felt very special. Like she had a space to do that, to sort of talk it out. Like, do you think this sounds crazy? And I'm like, yes, I've always thought it sounds crazy, but yes, keep going, and like, fine, I won't tell mom and dad because I don't want them to make a big deal out of it. But so there was like probably a year of her doing that, where she was still going, but kind of like stepping her toes out of it, but not fully like announcing to anybody like, oh yeah, I don't go to that church anymore. I'm fully out.
So when 2012 comes and goes, and you decide to do your own research, you start to research kind of cults yourself. So it may actually be that you were more aware of manipulation and coercion tactics before Toni ever was, if you went to kind of do a bit of research on what cults look like, how they may prey upon vulnerable people, what the methodologies look like. And then eventually Toni kind of phones you to have this conversation with you about what she's thinking about, but not acting on at that time. Do you kind of have a rough time of when this was? Because she left in 2020. Yes. So I don't know if you know kind of roughly when that was. Thanks.
I don't. So I do feel like when she had her second son, her first son was born in the church. He was very into it. He believed wholeheartedly in all of the teachings. Her second son's personality was so rebellious and so hilarious, because he, like, from the day he could start talking, he would say, I can't wait to celebrate Halloween. I love Santa Claus. And Toni would say, no, we don't celebrate Halloween. And he said, I love Santa Claus, Mommy. Yes, I do. I love Santa. Like, that was his personality, was whatever he wasn't supposed to like or want, he had to do that thing. And from my memory, that was sort of when it just became hard for Tony to go to church, because he wasn't like her first son who sat through a service for 3 hours quietly on the pew. Her second son was like wild and crazy and always climbing, and he presented like she realized it was going to be way harder to be as involved and also like raise this crazy little wild child. And you know he's lovely and he's still like just so awesome, but I think that was the beginning of me seeing that it was too much for her to kind of balance the church life and also trying to raise this little boy who was like, by the age of now, like how he's 6 now, there's no way he would sit through a church service for 3 hours quietly.
And when you discuss your memories of Tony's reactions at certain points around like Christmas decorations in your parents' home or your grandparents' home and things like that, I imagine that the fear she felt when her son would come forward and say, I love Santa Claus, she must have been thinking, no, you don't, please, no, you don't. It must have been really difficult for her to be like, we can't love Santa Claus. We can't. We're just not allowed to, She wouldn't go in the room full of Christmas decorations in your grandparents' house because she was terrified of it. So for her tiny little innocent baby to come forward and say, I'm going to go trick-or-treating, I'm going to celebrate Halloween, I'm going to dress up, she must have just been thinking, what's happening here? What do you do in that situation?
I know it puts her in an impossible situation. I mean, I think she really felt like, I don't know what to do if my son wants to do all this, because she was so used to her first son just being like, yeah, of course I believe in this. It was so interesting, but that is when I think that's too for her, when she was able to kind of say like, I need to take a step back from my duties in the church and like focus on this baby who jumps off of everything, stays up all night. Like, I'm having my sleep deprivation and all of my energy taken from this wild little boy. And I think being able to step back from her role in the church, then she was kind of able to see it more and more.
And how did you feel personally when you received that phone call from Tony where she was saying, I don't tell anybody about this, don't tell anyone what I'm about to tell you, but this is how I'm thinking and feeling at the moment?
I was like hesitantly excited. I remember like telling my husband, like, I think this is finally it. Like, I'm not gonna get too excited because I've thought that before. I've thought like, over the years, I thought when she had her second son that was kind of her way of saying like, I'm not going to follow it as intensely. And then she didn't really, she kept going for a little bit longer. And so I was like, I'm going to, this might be it, but maybe not. I'm not going to get too excited until she's like officially says like, I don't believe in that anymore and I'm done with it. And so, yeah, I was like half excited.
How did things progress after that phone call? Tony mentioned about the church telling her that she was no longer invited to keep the Passover. So that was devastating for her. Were you involved in her becoming aware of the church's decisions?
Yeah. She was very, very hurt by that. Like that it felt like comforting somebody going through a breakup. She was emotionally going through like a boyfriend breaking up with her. I felt like I was comforting her, like, don't answer the calls from them. They're jerks. That's so rude of them. You've spent so much time there. I can't believe they're ghosting you now. It was very, very mean, but I think it was the first time that she saw that behavior as mean too. And it was sad. It was hard to watch her go through that because for me, I wasn't shocked by the behavior. I was like, yeah, your church sucks. Like of course they did that. They're not nice people. They're like, the church in and of itself is not like a good organization. So yeah, it's like watching your kid get their feelings hurt, kind of. Like you know that the bully is just a mean bully, but your kid has to kind of process that too. So Tony was like my little baby at that time.
After she decided to completely stop with the church, how did that look like for you? I'm really eager to kind of understand how you were thinking and feeling at these times and compare them to Tony's experiences and her thoughts and feelings at the time. But I also want to know what it looks like for somebody, so that anybody listening who has family members involved in groups, anybody who's lost a loved one, anybody who's wondering how they can support somebody going through this experience. I'm wondering, like, what was your thought process when Tony was like, okay, well, I'm just going to leave now? Are you thinking like, how do I support her? What does the right support look like?
Right.
Are you kind of doing research? Like, is there anything you can offer us on like your journey through Tony's exit of the church?
Yeah. So I kind of mentioned earlier, like feeling guilty about looking back at my behavior, because that was probably when that started, was like, oh, this is so much more intense for her than I really imagined it was going to be. And I really just got to like kind of stuff my opinions down at this point and just really like be there as like a nice pillow for her. And it was a weird time too, because I'm sure she mentioned that it was the Passover going into like the COVID quarantine time. So physically we didn't really see each other a lot. It was a lot of Zoom calls, and we tried to stay away from each other physically as much as possible for like that whole summer. And so that was all. It was also just a weird time for everybody. Like we were all having this collective traumatic event as a whole world together. And so there was a lot more conversations about like self-care and just like be gentle on yourself. And I think everybody was sort of trying to do that for themselves and for each other at that time. So it was kind of like Tony was going through something traumatic with the rest of the world. Kind of aware of, so it felt like once she really made the decision to like, okay, I don't think I want to be involved anymore. It felt like it almost looked like the tape had been taken off of her eyes, and it was like, she could see it. She had been like kind of stepping out of it a little, but then when she made that final decision, it was like, oh my gosh, like that was not okay. That was not okay. That was not okay. And like really starting to look back at it with a totally different view. And so that was really interesting to see, and like kind of shocking, because I guess I never really, while she was in it, considered what it would be like for her coming out of it until she was going through it. And then I was like, this is actually really intense for her.
And did Tony sit down with you and your family and have a discussion with you about the sorts of experiences that she'd had and the things that were going on at those times when she wouldn't be present at family get-togethers and Christmases and things, and try to explain? Or I know you mentioned that that's kind of one of the reasons the podcast exists, Pain in Traffic.
Yeah.
But I don't know if there was ever the chance for Tony to sit down and say, like, this is what was happening, and I couldn't talk to any of you about any of it.
Right. I think she did it a little bit, and I think some of her feelings of why we kind of came up with the podcast was she felt like people were being really polite to her face. Like I feel like they want to know more, but they don't know how to ask me without just blatantly being like, tell me all about it, you know? And I was like, people would be interested to hear. Like her and I would talk about it on the phone a lot. I mean, during COVID, my sister and I were just on the phone all the time. She was like my main social connection outside of my household. And so we would that was kind of when she would tell me these stories, as she's like rehashing them through her memory. And then and then she was like, I think the family wants to ask me questions, but doesn't know how. So that was kind of the comment, like the idea of let's make a podcast and just answer them for them. And if they want to listen to it, then it's out there. And then for you, that could be your way to sort of talk yourself through it, like in a structured way, like start from the beginning and kind of talk your own way through it and see if that helps you like in the healing process of it. And she's done amazing. Like, I think if you listen to the first 3 episodes, you can hear the just like every episode she gets stronger and stronger. And it just validates the intensity of the pain that she felt leaving, going through the whole experience and realizing like, oh, I'm not being a baby. Like, this was really intense what I went through.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we talked a lot about how her psychological issues were manifesting into actual physical illnesses, which was quite an interesting segment of the episode, I think, in terms of understanding the effect that this type of belief system, lifestyle, commitments, responsibilities, guilt, everything kind of piling into one. It was a really interesting segment to just kind of explore what that looks like for somebody experiencing it at the time. But do you know if any of your family members have gone and actually listened to the podcast and had like conversations with you and Tony, like, oh my goodness, that's really interesting, or I had no idea?
It's so much fun because that happens all the time now. Like, people that I'm like, friends that I didn't even know were listening will be like, they'll say something that I said like 4 months ago on an episode. And I'm like, that is so bizarre, because I know that I said that on the podcast, but I had no idea you guys are listening. But family members, yeah, I think that they appreciate being able to hear the story without having to ask directly for the details, and having Tony retell the story over and over again. She's able to do it one time, and then if somebody's interested, she can say, oh, I actually have a podcast with that if you want to like hear the whole story. Now I don't have to tell you for an hour, like this like really dark period of my life where I have to like emotionally like go through it all over again. Because I think that's hard. I think that's probably hard for people coming out, is that it was such a large chunk of a lot of their lives. And so explaining it to somebody from the beginning is probably exhausting. And so I think the podcast is nice for Tony to have, to just be like, oh, you know what? I actually have like an entire episode about that. You can just go listen to it rather than me tell you. Because
how has it been for you learning about, some of the episodes in Playing in Traffic actually look at Stephen Hassan's bite model, and you kind of go through that with Tony, exploring some of the methods that are used within this particular group that are relevant to that behavior, information, thought, and emotional control model that he has developed as a cult expert. Has it been interesting for you to learn about that model and some of the methods that take place? And then again, another layer on top of that, to learn how those methods were applied to Tony personally and were a part of her experience.
Yeah. It's I've kind of gone through emotions of anger and sadness and exhaustion with Tony, hearing just how structured so many of the things that happened in their church were. Because obviously years ago, I knew that Tony was involved in a cult, and I've been trying to get her out of it. But to see it written out on paper, like in a worksheet that is structured and academic, and it just would bring up so many. It made me angry, but not knowing who to send the anger to, right? You're like, who should I be angry at? Like the two like figureheads of this religion, or I think that's our struggle. Me and Tony collectively is like, once you realize you were involved in this, like, then who do you turn to sort of say they're the ones that I don't know, like, this is like a philosophical question of like, is there someone to blame for this, or is it just a human nature to want to join a group and then it gets out of hand? And
I think it's absolutely human nature to want to be part of something bigger than ourselves, to build a community, and in that sense. But again, it's hard to know where to place the blame, because when you have anger and you have resentment and you have grief, you want to be able to place those emotions somewhere. You want to be able to put names to the feelings that you have. And if it's things like anger, you want to know where to direct that energy and that focus towards. And if it's not Tony that you direct it towards because of her pushing your family away, spending less time with the family, rejecting all of the family traditions that you've upheld since you were young together and really close, her impatience with you visiting, and kind of seeming preoccupied with other things that are going on, and kind of getting that feeling that she doesn't want you there, or she's wondering when you're going to leave. So if you don't place that anger on Tony, which is what I imagine has happened with a lot of survivors or victims of cults and high demand groups, then you want to know where that anger goes. And I think that's a very natural response and a very natural feeling to have. So the fact that you can sit down together as sisters, as friends, as two people that trust each other, and have these conversations and understand that neither of you are at fault for thinking and feeling those things and having those emotions, that Tony's not at fault for the systematic and spiritual abuse that she experienced, that you're not at fault for telling her she's crazy or bringing her information that you found on the internet to try and sever her connection with that group. It's hard to know who's at fault, because even when I spoke to Tony yesterday and she said that she really misses her community and she really misses her spiritual family, we had a discussion around how it's normal to miss people, but also it's not normal be loved conditionally by people that you consider your family. Right. So the conditions being that as long as you remain in this group and as long as you keep this group as your family, and as long as your faith lies only with this particular religion, will we love you in the way that we love you now. So that's not right either. So there's a lot of things to consider. But as Tony moves out of the group and she has you as her sounding board, and you reestablish that strong connection, and you're maybe kind of opening up to each other more than you have before, and you're really enjoying each other's company, and you decide to kind of go on this venture together where you learn about the methods of cults and coercion, and you start this podcast together. You said you're still learning things every day. You're still hearing things for the first time that you didn't know Tony had experienced or been through. Is she having those same revelations with you because she was so distant from your family, and you're saying, me and my ex-partner had this big fight once, or me and my boss at work had this big fight once, or, this one time I got this great promotion? I mean, is she having those experiences where she's like, hang on, I don't remember that happening?
Yeah. And that's actually a common thing that I'm hearing from a lot of the ex-members that we're connecting with, is that while they're in there, in their minds, everybody's standing still. Like when they go in there, they're friends with this group of people, and then they're not realizing that like everybody else is also living their life, and like all these things are happening individually to all these people. So when they do come out, it is kind of a shock to them to say like, oh, you like have a master's degree in like technology now? That's crazy. I mean, I do not have that, but just learning that all these people are like out in the world doing all these things. And that happens all the time with me and Tony. I'll tell a story and I'm like, yeah, you knew that happened. Like, that was a pretty significant thing. And she's like, I had no idea that happened. And actually, Tony sort of stepping out a foot out of this church is actually what really helped me leave a relationship that I needed to leave. Wow. Like, I was in a relationship for a really long time that was like not good. I knew I needed to leave, but I was just like young and kind of sticking around because I didn't really know what else to do. And so as her and I started to get closer, like way before she actually left, but just kind of the beginnings of probably around when my second nephew was born. And her and I would talk, and I would tell her like, oh, this is what happened like this week. And she's like, that's not normal. And I was like, is it not? And she's like, no. Like, do other people know this is going on? Like, we need to talk about this, and like hearing that from my sister, I'm like, it was like I had her guidance again. And so like pretty quickly I was like, yeah, you're right. Like, that's probably not a good situation that we're in. So like that was my immediate like, okay, my sister is my best friend. She's the only one who can like say things to me in a way that like get to me, like friends could say it 100 times, but when my sister says something, it's like, you need to not do that anymore.
Wow.
And I would be like, okay, older sister, yes.
Have you found it interesting drawing parallels between things like toxic relationships and domestic abuse and high demand groups and cults?
Yes. So similar.
It's so interesting to hear the journey that you've both taken separately, but you're now kind of on together.
Yeah. Yeah. And you look back at it and you're like, I mean, you were doing this, but I was also doing this. And like, when you compare the two, neither of them were very good choices on our parts. And, and so I think that's where a lot of where people maybe will be angry at their family member. I don't really feel like I have a right to be, because I was also like making bad decisions and doing things that were not healthy and good for me at the time also. So there was no judgment towards Tony, because I guess I felt like I wasn't at like a superior morality position to be making against her anyways at that point.
And again, I think that's a very reflective and fair way to look at things that not many people may have in their day-to-day thoughts, especially if they try and keep communication with a family member who seems to be doing anything other than maintaining that communication, which can be exhausting for some people, which can seem unfair, which can seem one-sided, which makes people give up. So I think you have a very grounded and very neutral way of looking at things, which is very important when it comes to supporting somebody in their journey out of one of these groups. And Tony mentioned that her son celebrated his first Christmas last year. So I assume that means you're all back together again for big family celebrations during the holidays.
Fun. Yeah, it was really fun.
That's great. That's so great. And are you all getting together to go trick-or-treating?
We didn't this year because we live so far apart. So it's hard to get to like one end of town to the other for Halloween. Christmas has always been like a few day long celebration in our family. One of the things that Tony sort of gave to me when we were younger is that when she joined the church, she stopped obviously going to like Christmas service and stuff with our family. And for a few years, I still did that, even though I was like, I'm an atheist, but I'm not going to tell my sweet little old grandma that. I'll just go to Christmas service and suck it up. And the first year that my daughter was born, I had her at Christmas service. And I was like, I don't like what they're teaching, and I don't want my daughter to overhear this. And so Tony's rebellion sort of gave me permission to say, I will come to the Christmas stuff, but I don't want to go to church service. So I will meet you guys all. I will like go cook all the food and meet you guys after, or whatever you need me to do. I'll be helpful, and I'm still coming to Christmas. But the church part of it, Tony gave me sort of permission to say like, wait, I don't want to do that either. If she doesn't have to, I don't want to do it. And so that was like a really cool thing with Christmas, was that she sort of opened up the possibility to be able to sort of say like, to tweak it a little. Like, our family has always done this traditional, like, this is how we do it. Like, this day we do this and that day. And it's been nice to have a little bit of freedom in that. But I don't even remember the point. Yes, we get together throughout the holidays now.
That's so great. And I know that is probably a difficult question to answer around things like trick-or-treating, because Tony left officially in 2020 and we've all kind of been locked in our houses for the last 2 years.
So it was kind of like their first Halloween, their first Christmas, where we all were really together and celebrated it like a...
Yeah. But hopefully now that the COVID restrictions are really lifting around the world and things are returning to some kind of normality, and Toni and her family find themselves not aligned with the church and not involved in a high demand religious group, perhaps this will be the year for many firsts or many regatherings and celebrations of other things. So I guess my last question to you, in case you think there's anything we've missed, is what advice would you give as a family member of somebody who has joined a high demand religious group or a high demand? What would be your advice as a family member of a loved one who has gone to join a high demand group that loses a strong connection with a loved one that they've grown up with and been close with, that's seen the changes and in personality and belief systems and language, and perhaps slight deterioration in physical and mental health? What would be your advice in maintaining a relationship with that person, helping that person, and then assisting them when they come to you and finally say, I'm ready to leave?
Yeah. I think being the person for them that doesn't make them feel guilty for being in it. I think that was why we were able to keep our relationship, was that we're sisters. And so we have that relationship where I can kind of push on her and she can push back at me. But I never made her feel stupid. Like, I never thought she was stupid for being in there. And I never would say, like, you're so stupid, what are you doing? Like the anger that you want to feel towards them and the frustration that is caused by this, just giving them a safe space to come back to, and also being somebody who reminds them of who they really are outside of that cult identity. So for them to know that they have you on the other side when they're ready to come out, and like just maintain presence regardless of, I mean, I know it's different for every group or cult, because some of them really like fully isolate and you're like not allowed to speak to each other. And in those cases, I would just say be available for them when they're ready to come out. But if you're able to like maintain contact, I would do it. And, don't make every conversation about like, what are you doing? Are you okay? Like bring normalcy into it. Like, hey, do you guys like watch the football game? Or, I don't know, try to insert as much of the normalcy to remind them that there's a world that is existing outside of like their parameters at that point.
That's kind of similar to some of the advice that we've heard on the show before around bringing up memories and things that may help that person feel connected to something outside of the group. So if you were to say, oh my goodness, remember when we went down to the creek and we did this and you fell over in the water, and sometimes jogging those memories may give that person a chance to start to think about other things that happened before, and to remember that there is love and connection outside of the group. But what you said about, even if a person can't or doesn't maintain contact, be ready for them when they do, is so important. There are so many groups that encourage complete isolation in terms of no phones, no internet, no communication with anything outside of the immediate group, especially if there's compounds and communes involved. So just being available when that person makes contact is such an incredible piece of advice. And the way that you, even on your podcast, Playing in Traffic, even the way that you position yourself during those episodes is so helpful for Tony and the other survivors when they speak about their experiences, in that you don't judge, you don't place blame, you allow them to have the space to talk about themselves, and you encourage it as well. And you are patient, and you are able to help with some of the more academic side of things in terms of applying terminology to some of the things that happened. So I think that's so incredibly important. And if anybody has a chance to go and subscribe to Playing in Traffic, or goes to listen to a few episodes, you'll hear exactly what I'm talking about here. And I think it's a great tool for family members who are unsure how to support their loved ones or how to communicate with their loved ones that they have lost to a high demand group. So this is a perfect example of how to do that. And the way that you've positioned yourself in this episode, just being like, I can't judge, I was making questionable decisions at a certain age. And, I kind of didn't question Tony's decisions because I myself had a period of being conservative in my Christian values and beliefs, and I would go to my own Bible study sessions. So I'd been there and I'd done those things. So, even I could have been vulnerable to a high demand group or a cult during a certain period of my life. So the very neutral and fair position that you put yourself in, I imagine, allows Tony to prosper in her healing journey and to feel validated and really seen and listened to, which is so incredibly important for survivors. And I think you're an incredible ally for your sister and for other survivors. And I really hope that your platform continues to rally together more survivors and more of a community. Because something that we mentioned yesterday, when Tony said that she misses her old community, I said it's very important to remember that you're now part of a new community that loves one another, supports one another, listens to one another in perhaps more of a less conditional environment. So I think that's fantastic. And I think there's a lot for people to take away from this episode in terms of how to support their loved ones. And perhaps how to look at things in a slightly different way that might make things easier to digest in terms of placing blame and being angry and having a lot of different emotions. And even the way you spoke about, Tony's made her decisions. I'm here for Christmas. I want to enjoy Christmas, so why can't we just enjoy Christmas? Even just having those honest thoughts and opinions and allowing yourself to understand that you're human and you have those thoughts and feelings, and you're not ashamed to be like, let's make Christmas a little bit about me. Why is it always about Tony? That's normal as well, and that's human. And I'm sure that there are so many people that have been in that position where they just want to get on with things, but their family is so stuck on the absence of one child or the absence of one family member, whether that's because of addiction of some type or negative behaviors or just general estrangement or illness or whatever manner of family absence that may exist in people's lives. I imagine there's so many people out there that are just like, can we just move on from this and just be in the present and stop worrying about things that we can't change, right? or stop worrying about decisions that other people have made when we've given them the chance to make different decisions. Right. So I think you're such a fantastic ally for your sister. And I think your sister's so brave for coming forward with her story after being in a captive organization for so many years. So thank you so much for...
after all of that nice stuff you just said about me.
Well, I don't know. I hope so. But I think it's just important to highlight the impact that I'm sure you're having on your sister and other people, and hopefully how your journey can impact others who are listening to this episode as well. So just thank you so much for coming here today, for giving me your time, for sharing your insights and your experiences, and for just being an ally to survivors who want to share their stories.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is so great. I'm so happy to be here.
So I'm going to log off for the night, but I will speak to you soon, Lindsay, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. See you later. Bye.
That is the end of this week's episode. If you'd like to get in touch, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram @cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been The Cult Vault.